We'll begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please bear with me. We'll begin. It's 7 o'clock. We said we begin at 7, and it goes this way. Adequate notice of this June the 8th, 2017 meeting has been provided in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act by posting written notice and agenda of this meeting on the bulletin board in the Municipal Building, 1000 Route 10, Township of Hanover, and by hand delivering, mailing, or faxing such notice and agenda to the following newspapers: Morris County's Daily Record, the Star Ledger, Hanover Eagle, and by filing same with the Township Clerk. I have a roll call, Mr. Administrator.
And Mr. Gallagher said he'll be a little late. Mr. Faramasca?
Here.
Mr. Bruno is going to be a little late. Mr. Capola?
Here.
And Mayor Francioli.
Here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, those that can, would you please rise and join me in a pledge allegiance to our flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. Tonight, as you know, we're beginning earlier. We have a very special presentation to make tonight, which is the culmination of several years of work on behalf of the Hanover Township Economic Development Advisory Committee. This is a group of men and women that meet several times a month and take into consideration businesses, economic development in our township and community and the direction of our township. Presentation tonight is going to be head up by Dan Breen, chairman of that committee. But on that note, right now, I'd like to turn the meeting over to the Director of Economic Development, and that's Deputy Mayor John Faramasca. John?
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, thank you all for coming out tonight. We appreciate your interest in our community. I'll begin with, who is EDAC? EDAC, Economic Development Advisory Council. Who are these mysterious people? Well, EDAC is a group of about a dozen or so residents of your town who help contribute to the economic vitality of Hanover Township. And I'd like, at this point, these mysterious people, members of EDAC, both current and past, to include Mayor Sheridan, who was kind of like the founder of EDAC, to stand up at this point in our meeting. So please rise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. These individuals continue to do a great job marketing Hanover Township, and we truly thank them for their efforts. EDAC, for those of you who have a memory that goes back a little bit, and I'm sure you do, EDAC was instrumental during the dark days, back in 2009, when Hanover Township faced some really difficult times. We were in a rateable crisis. People were losing their jobs. People were losing their homes. And this group came together with one single point focus to renew economic development in Hanover Township, which had virtually been shut down. Tonight we're going to be talking about something called Hanover 2026. Hanover 2026 is a visioning statement. It's a document about future of what economic development could be, okay, what it could be. The single goal of Hanover 2026 is to provide a strategic understanding of the issues that may impact economic development in our community over the next 10 years. The findings of this study, this comprehensive study, which this group has been working on for nearly 2 years, are informational. They're advisory. They're not a policy-making group, but they're a vital group in terms of bringing us information. The findings will be used as facts for the governing body, for the people at this dais, to evaluate, and for the planning board members, of which I see many of them in the audience as well, to assess as it relates to the following things. Number one, what are the expected macroeconomic and demographic changes that will occur? Things will happen over the next 10 years, regardless whether we want them to do or whether we not. They will happen. What are the impacts of these changes? Along with, can we bring forward a blueprint that might allow us to better manage these changes so that we can preserve the great suburban character of the town which we enjoy today? So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dan Breen, who's the chairman of the Economic Development Advisory Council. He's going to walk us through the presentation, while at the same time, I'd ask members of the public who are here tonight to wait until the end of the meeting to ask your questions, because you have an opportunity to ask questions of the council as well. So at this point, Dan Breen, it's all yours.
Thank you, John. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mayor Francioli. Thanks to the members of the committee, and thanks to everyone who's in attendance tonight. Hanover 2026, and that's a bold, sweeping statement. It's been a lot of day today, a lot of frantic last-minute preparations, a lot of high stress, and that was just getting my daughter off to the prom earlier this afternoon. So I'm looking at this as a relative picnic. But on a serious note, what is Hanover 2026, and how long did we work on it, and why did we work on it this long? Well, what happened is, about a year and a half ago, what we realized as a group was that the focus needed to change. You know, John, you alluded to the dark days of 2009, 2010, when we had a huge ratables crisis here in town. We had something on the order of 20 vacant or underutilized significant commercial sites here in town. And at that time, it was really kind of a fire drill, right? The entire focus of EDAC was, how do we fill in the gap, restore the ratables base, and make this town attractive to commercial development and redevelopment. That focus has really shifted. And now what we're trying to figure out is, how do we incorporate the positive change that we've had? How do we maintain the suburban character of the community? And that's what Hanover 2026 is about, trying to balance all these competing interests with an eye towards the demographic changes that are happening both here and globally, and to shape the town in the way that the committee obviously deems appropriate, the people of the town here deem appropriate. And that brings me to a very important point, which is that EDAC is a purely advisory committee. We don't dictate anything. We don't have any authority. All we do is try to leverage our experience, our thinking, and provide strategic guidance to the township committee, the township government, and hopefully towards the betterment of the town. What our program here aspires to do is to leverage Hanover's many strengths, recognize and hopefully realize the opportunities that we've got, and frankly confront and mitigate where we can some of the weaknesses and threats that we face. The classic SWOT analysis, which really underlies this whole thing. And we would work obviously in conjunction with the master plan. Again, we don't dictate anything. This is purely a function of how can we help offer guidance, advice, insight that can help this township reach its full potential. How we're going to do that? Talk a little bit about situation assessment, and then really the heart of the discussion is around the 4 Hanover 2026 subcommittees, those being communication, balancing redevelopment and quality of life, data and transportation, and then we'll wrap up. What we'll do is stop at the end of that situation assessment, and then each of the 4 subcommittee pieces for any questions from the committee as appropriate. So, one thing that came up in EDAC a few years through a marketing program was a potential motto for the town being great things happening in Hanover, great things happen in Hanover. And great things are happening in Hanover. We alluded earlier to the 2009-10 ratables crisis. We've been able to leverage, I think, an increasingly business-friendly mindset, a really outstanding location and infrastructure, and some outstanding sites as well, to attract and grow a diverse base of corporate residents. And you see some of those up here to the right, from Bear to MetLife to now Barclays, Wegmans, and several others. As I alluded to before, we've got a restored tax base, so now the focus of EDAC changes from business attraction and retention to how do we absorb what's come in, and how do we help make the town how do we help define what the town aspires to and what it's going to look like in the next 10 years. So going back to 2010 once again, right? what we had, a lot of vacant commercial sites, some really ugly, vacant retail facilities in key places in the township. Our flagship corporate headquarters, Alcatel-Lucent, vacant, overgrown. How does that look like today? Well, a lot different, right? You have award-winning major Bear and MetLife projects on the Whippany Road campus. You have UniFirst, which represents the conversion of a value-free rateable for the township as a federal property to now being a significant taxpayer here in the community. You have Wegmans, one of the most popular shopping brands in the United States. You have 47 Quick Checks. The other 44 are coming into the planning board shortly. I'm just kidding. Quick Check, all kidding aside, I know they've been the butt of some jokes, but Quick Check's been a great neighbor. For people, making fun of them all the time, I'll tell you what, they sure get a lot of traffic. They create jobs. They've done environmental cleanup. They've made some traffic improvements in the sites they've gone to, and they've gotten rid of some eyesores. They've occupied some eyesore sites. So for Quick Check's been a good neighbor in a lot of ways. We've had some good residential developments. The Red Bulls, which has a certain cachet, is a professional sports team here in the township. And finally, and this was highlighted in the New Jersey League of Municipalities magazine this month, Hanover Avenue is really sort of a miniature miracle of its own, right? Not only ShopRite, but all the other facilities that are going in up there. Again, we're seeing road improvements, traffic improvements that are going to improve flow up there as part of arrangements with the developers, and that should, continue to create ratables growth in the years to come. So, let's talk a little bit about what that means from a numbers standpoint. Okay, so from 2012 to 2016, that's a very, very healthy chart showing what the assessments, the added assessments we've seen over the last 5 years. That spike in 2013 is obviously Bear. The blue line is commercial properties. The red line is residential. But we've seen slow and steady growth in residential ad, but we've seen dramatic increases in commercial ad, and that's had a very positive effect because the mix of the ratables has now changed from where we were almost 60% residential in 2018 to where we're almost 60% commercial in 2014. And what that means to residents is that our average residential property taxes, adjusted for inflation, have actually declined over the last 7 years, which is unheard of in this state in general. And, the statewide increase has been over 5% at a time where we've gone down. Again, that's adjusted for inflation. In nominal dollars, it has, in fact, gone up slightly. So, looking at some other indicators, and let me say this, too. We've picked a few numbers here. We could be here all night going through numbers in detail. That's not the point of the exercise tonight. The point of the exercise is to really just highlight some of the key indicators we're seeing and what we think those mean to the township and how they've informed our recommendations and suggestions here that we're going to put forward tonight. Population, we're not seeing a lot of growth, some moderate growth. This is interesting. The K-8 school population has gradually declined over the last several years. And I think that's reflective of a few things, larger demographic patterns. We had all kinds of data on this, and we just decided not to put it in here. But people are getting married some years later than they did 10 or 15 years ago. People are having less children than they did 10 or 15 years ago. People who live in multi-tenant housing have less children than people who live in single-family housing. So we're seeing a little bit of a decline in school population. So the point is, if anything, we need some new people. We need some new kids in the schools. And the other piece of this, and again, it's apropos of nothing other than information, is that the comparative median age of the township is high in a relative sense and increasing. It was 43.9 in 2010. It's 45.7 in 2016. And if we take the county's estimates going forward, they think it's going to reach close to 47 years old in 2021. So that number is rising, and I'm not necessarily saying it's anything to worry about. It's just something, again, that informs our thinking and informs our decision-making. So the market here is evolving in different ways. It's pretty gradual. There was a big spike in housing prices here from 2000 to 2010. That's very generally flattened out from 2010 to 16. We're still about where we were in a relative sense. We're still higher than the statewide average, as you'd expect. But there's not a lot of growth over the last 6 years in housing prices locally. What we have seen change over the last few years is that the portion of owned versus renter-occupied housing in town has more than doubled. That's a significant change, and it's expected to continue increasing out to 2021. We did include the county's projections there. These are demographic trends, right? This is not anyone making, I think, a policy decision. These are things that are happening in the market in terms of what people are doing demographically, and there's all kinds of talk about how millennials feel about home ownership and how they're approaching that. These trends are happening, and they're coming. So what does that mean to the township? Well, it raises some questions that are frankly either beyond the purview of EDAC or are questions that EDAC is going to have to answer over the next couple of years. And as I mentioned earlier, our focus is changing to really focus on some of these questions. For instance, does the township offer sufficient housing for seniors and empty nesters and/or millennials and younger residents? Is the township's housing mix sufficient to accommodate large employers? I mean, we don't necessarily know right now how Bayer and MetLife and some of these other companies that have come in, Barclays, feel about the mix of housing here and how that's going to impact their long-term plans. One constant theme we hear from residents and businesses is around amenities. How can the township develop more amenities? How will demographic changes impact township services, to address a point that George recently raised? These changes are happening. How are they going to impact the township as a whole? And then finally, which obviously we have limited control over, how will COA impact the township? We know there's change coming. We know there's probably going to be impact. What's it going to be? We don't know. So these are changes that will either make themselves known or that we'll have to deal with over the coming years. But the bottom line is the data in many respects raises more questions than it answers. Our objective tonight is to try to focus on providing achievable answers to the questions that we do feel strongly that we have the information we need to give you good advice. John talked a little bit earlier about EDAC when it was formed. It's an extraordinarily dedicated group of people who've been very much, they've worked hard, they've been visionary, they've brought their professional experience to bear. And I'm grateful to each and every one of them and some of the former members. John Sheridan here tonight, obviously. I don't see Bob Nardone. Rocco Sino was here, and he's up there anyway. But to name them individually, the communication subcommittee was myself, Rich Campbell, and Mayor Francioli. The committee that focused on balancing redevelopment and quality of life was Rocco Sino, Art Linfante, Danny Bonilla, and Chris Conklin. Tom Hoblitzel and Michael Liu worked on data, and then the transportation piece was handled by Maria Sheridan, John Ferramasca, and Stan Omland. So before we move into the specific subcommittees, I guess I wanted to stop and see if anyone on the committee had any questions at this stage.
Dan,
Yes,
exactly
sir.
what does COA, how's COA going to, do we have any idea how COA is going to impact all of this moving into the future? I know they keep looking at new numbers, new rounds, and things like that. Is that something that we
I think it's something we're going to have to study, and I think it's something we don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, it's been a logjam on this in Trenton for, certainly throughout the Christie administration and probably before that. So the township, I think, has historically pretty skillfully navigated that issue. But I think it's something that EDAC, as it goes forward, is going to have to focus on, understand, and think about how it's going to, contribute to the conversation, because I do think that's obviously a little bit of a sword of Damocles in certain respects hanging over the township and our ability to make these decisions on our own.
I know we've got credits, but I'm just concerned that, the state in their ultimate wisdom decides to turn around and say, well, regardless of the fact you got credits or you've done well, you're still going to get some obligation. And I'm just hoping that, somewhere it's a little tweaked.
Yeah, completely agree.
Okay.
Completely agree. But I think that's something that is going to have to evolve over the next couple of years, and I do think that EDAC can play a role in understanding that and at least hopefully providing some insight.
Thank you.
I don't know that we have any native expertise on the group right now, but maybe we should get some.
We don't. We're just doing that.
Yeah. Okay. So the subcommittees. These were created in as far back as the fall of 2015. By the way, anybody else have any questions before I continue? Okay. So the subcommittees were created in the fall of 2015, and we had, after fairly long and boring discussions, identified these 4 items as really being the key drivers that are going to impact the future of the township. And one thing I want to point out about EDAC, I mentioned the people, is we spent a lot of time trying to arrive at consensus, incorporate everyone's viewpoints and perspectives. There are some Fridays where I feel like we don't get that much done, frankly. Certainly Rich Campbell doesn't feel like we get that much done. Because we really are trying to hash out these issues and incorporate different viewpoints and take in all this information. So this took some time to distill, but I feel good about the bottom line, and what I'd like to do is invite the members of the subcommittees as we go through their sections to chime in where appropriate and help answering the questions. As far as communication, the objective there is to evaluate and identify means by which we can enhance communication with residents and local businesses, as well as improve our external outreach within the region and state in terms of helping to market the community and facilitate constructive redevelopment. As far as the conclusions and recommendations reached by this particular group, this is really kind of the fundamental issue. Information dissemination is changing continuously, literally every day, right? We've done a great job here with these e-blasts and some other things, but that seems increasingly to be different than the types of communications that people are looking towards. We need to be proactive in addressing these changes and trying to keep up with the times. There's a lot of things that I think we've done here as a town that are ahead of the market. We're the envy of the state in a lot of regards. The Lieutenant Governor has credited Hanover for its economic development efforts in a lot of respects. But here, when it comes to communication, I think, frankly, we're behind a lot of communities, even some of those around us. That said, we have these existing platforms. A lot of people are comfortable with them. They do have a readership. Continuous improvement needs to be a focus. So expand distribution, cost efficiencies. One of the things I know we talked about was increased electronic distribution as opposed to paper distribution of some items. Give people the option to opt out or opt in, such as the case may be. Format refinements where that's going to help. This is the big one. We were pretty definitive in our wording here. There needs to be prompt approval for municipal adaptation of social media platforms and a launch timeline. Here's what that means. Again, a lot of communities are out in social media. That's not necessarily an easy or straightforward thing. There are legal challenges. There are First Amendment issues. There are personnel issues that come with social media. But at the end of the day, this is where people are going for news, and that's not going to change. And if the township doesn't control that debate, provide that news, provide facts, as opposed to some of the fake news that we see floating around out on various Facebook pages, we're gonna fall behind, and other people are going to kind of dictate the terms of discussion around what the township is doing. So this is a real issue, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter. I had one suggestion today that we could even do a township app that would provide a one-way form of communication outbound. So that's got to be a point of focus for the township, and I think that's one of the strongest recommendations we're going to make tonight. And finally, and this is really kind of an evolutionary thing, and again, I think a way for Hanover to get ahead of the crowd. Communications is an increasing part of what the township does, whether it's social media, whether it's media outreach, whether it's communication even internally, press releases, magazines, articles, all the things that get your name and your brand out there as a community. The suggestion from EDAC is that the township evaluate and implement the creation of a communications officer role within the township. There was an intern last summer, and I think will be again this year. Maybe a part-time person, eventually, hopefully, morphing to a full-time person. But that's a change that I think would put Hanover ahead, that we think would put Hanover ahead of a lot of communities. Rich, Ron, I don't know if you had anything to add on this slide? Other members of the committee? Okay. So with that, I'll open it to questions from the committee.
I have one for you, Dan.
Sure.
A lot of the towns are going into tap into East Hanover, Florham Park, tap into East Hanover, tap into Livingston. I think I discussed with Rich a while ago about the tap into company.
Right.
And we discussed possibly exploring that. Did you guys speak to them at all?
Did not speak, no.
No.
They're doing a lot of the things like this, and it's very structured, and there is somebody that has to approve it from town hall. And that seems to be the trend right now. And like you said before, trends always come and go. Something hits and then it's gone. Flavor of the week. Tap into is really big right now. And I know it's... Mark Taylor from Florham Park said the year is cheaper than just the quarterly newsletter alone.
Right.
So tap into might be something to just check. Even it's probably like healthcare. Every 2-3 years you got to reevaluate and change it.
I think that's what it comes down to.
Look into.
I don't know that I would necessarily advocate a specific platform right now, because Facebook is kind of what's hot now, at least it seems, with residents, and you want to give the people what they want, but it changes so fast. I mean, these things come in and go out of fashion so quickly that, you almost, like you said, have to be reevaluating every 2 or 3 years. But I think the larger point remains that the township needs to address what I think is it's not present in the social media game, and I do think that we pay a little bit of a price for that with misinformation being spread among residents.
The structure is there. I mean, even Gallagher brings up a good point, but it's just one other level in apps like this. The structure is there through the present website, etc., and the structure is there for Hanover Township to use the e-blast. But when it comes to two-way communication, you're right. Then it becomes one of social networks and social networks like Facebook, etc. But the critical thing here is that most of us here in the governing body, may or may not be on Facebook. They may read a post. They may not read a post. They may answer a post. They may not answer a post. But my personal opinion is written into your document, and that is that we should have one that is not a part of the governing body or elected official answering these questions. It should be an individual, a staff individual from the township that can give objectivity and correct factual answers in every case. Facebook, on the township's part, and we've looked at some policies, by the way, in our library, had provided me with an excellent policy that they looked at. Should deliver information, but not engage in the township to engage in dialogue. It should deliver accurate information, and that's really what we're trying to work toward.
Right.
Put it that way.
It's a tough issue. There are some challenges there. I think we need to be proactive and probably err on the side of flipping the switch is I think the general feeling from the committee. But recognizing that there are challenges with this. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Moving on. Balancing redevelopment and quality of life. The second subcommittee, EDAC recognizes that we need to maintain a strong rateable base and a diverse, dynamic business community. But at the same time, we're very focused on retaining the suburban character of this township. This is where we live, raise our families, in many cases operate businesses, and we want to continue and improve the provision of amenities that are important to residents. So a couple of points here. I'm actually going to go off script and flip a slide ahead. Right. Okay, so first of all, as far as conclusions, recommendations here, We've got some great recreational amenities. Art and Darren O'Connor and some others have taken the lead, Deputy Mayor Faramasca, in working on a connectivity plan. I think that's a huge draw for not only residents but also businesses. If you look around the Bear and MetLife campuses these days, there's people out at lunch, walking around. We need to give them a safe and an attractive place to do that, and I think this connectivity plan is a great way to do it. We need to reach something of a consensus on residential development. Like we talked about, market and demographic trends are what they are. External mandates, COA and others, are going to happen. We've got available properties. And you're hearing that a lot of seniors, empty nesters, and a lot of younger people feel like they're presently lacking in housing alternatives here in the township. It's a challenge. I know there's a lot of debate around this, but at the very least, I think the committee needs to put its heads together and think about how that fits into its bigger development plans. And then this comes back to communication. We need to keep residents informed. Last I heard, we're going to have a 40-story block of apartments over at corporate mailings. It's going to be huge.
I thought it was going where all of them churches.
Yeah, that too. I mean, again, these rumors fly around. We need to communicate what's happening in the township, what's happening in terms of development. To go back here. So the other big point is that residents continually talk about wanting a place to live, work, and play. Right? That's the buzzword these days in the real estate community. A true town center here in Whippany, in Hanover. Thing is, the potential is here. There's a gigantic donut hole, right? We tend to think of these things in terms of individual sites, the Route 10 corridor, Whippany Village, corporate mailings, River Park, Pine Plaza. If you look at it from 30,000 feet, there's a gigantic donut hole in the middle of this township. And development of this area is inevitable. It's going to happen. These developers did not buy these properties, have not made these investments, so that they're not going to get a return on investment. So it's going to have a significant impact on the character of this town, and we as a township need to shape how that development happens. And I think it needs to be done on a strategic basis. It needs to be done trying to develop big picture with these developers, in conjunction with these developers, and it needs to balance all these different factors that we've talked about earlier. Maintaining a rateable base, maintaining a suburban quality of life, providing housing options for people who need them, keeping companies here, right? I'd love nothing better than to see an office park in the middle of River Park, but let's face it, we have 25 to 30% office vacancy in Morris County. The chances that we're going to see another Bear or MetLife, which was frankly something of a miracle, are almost nil. It's very unlikely to happen. So what's the option? Do you go to an industrial site? Do you go to distribution? Do people want trucks coming in and out on Eden Lane, Parsippany Road? I mean, we recognize the challenge. We recognize that these are not easy questions. But it comes down to options, identifying what those options are, and hopefully working with the developers to negotiate a good alternative that's going to work for the township. So we need to here as well have an end game for balanced redevelopment in this area of the township. It needs to promote the goals and objectives of balanced redevelopment, be grounded in economic feasibility. I mean, boy, we'd all like it if somebody turned it into green space and made it a giant park, but that's unfortunately not going to happen. And it needs to recognize and be responsive to the trends we're seeing in the demographics and real estate market. So here's the decision tree that we've kind of kicked around as a group as it relates to development of this particular area and really any redevelopment project. And it comes down to what are the alternatives? Well, one is status quo. That's unlikely. Any developer invests in order to get a return. So redevelopment at some point of those sites is inevitable. If we can negotiate a development, form a strategic partnership with one or more of these developers, we retain an element of control. And that's a good outcome. right? That's what we want. We want to have a voice in this process. But if we don't, if we say to the developer, we're just going to say no, well, what you end up with then is either they're going to develop within the existing confines of zoning, and whether or not that use fits, whether or not that's what the township wants, they don't care. They just want to kind of play their small ball, get their site developed and get out of there and make as much money as they possibly can. Or even a worst case scenario is that the developer goes to court, and then he's going to craft a plan that suits the judge's objectives, not the township's. COA being an obvious example there. So these are again, not an easy list of choices. I'm sure you could poke holes in the decision tree here, but at the end of the day, the point is, we can't just look at a development option in and of itself in a vacuum. We need to look at it in the context of the options that we're left with. Did any members, Art, Rocco, Chris, anyone else have anything to add on this particular section? Come on, Art, you're dying.
I can't say it any better than you do.
Okay. So with that, any questions from any members of the committee?
What is your frustration level with Pine Plaza? I know that I look at all this stuff that's taken place on page 3 of 3 and 5, I believe, and this committee has done a wonderful job with bringing positive development and redevelopment into the town. But if you take a place like Pine Plaza, and I know the mayor has tried hard with the deputy mayor to try to get something going, but it seems like when someone is as stubborn and for whatever reason don't want to move, what does that do to you poor people? You must go crazy.
It's a challenge, right? You're absolutely right, George, and I couldn't agree more. Why hasn't Pine Plaza succeeded is something that we've wrestled with for a long time. One of the things that we learned recently, and we'll go to, I think, a trend that I think a direction EDAC's going to head in the coming years, is that we had some expert testimony from outside subject matter experts about retail development here in Hanover Township and on Route 10 in particular. And there are some issues there that I guess came as news to me, and I think a lot of the other people in the room, how the market views these sites and how the market views Route 10 as a target for development. And that's something we're going to have to deal with. Pine Plaza, though, it's a beautiful piece of property. There's a lot of attributes there. Some businesses have certainly gone in there and done pretty well. There does seem to be, I don't know if I can presume to kind of pass judgment on the ownership's conduct or how they run their business, but boy, it seems like something's not working over there. So that's a very good question. Yes, sir.
The town center, have you given a thought to the area of Central Park to Route 10, straight after that Jefferson Road, east of it?
Well, I think we view that as part of River Park. Yeah, that is part of that donut hole that's in the middle of the township. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think ultimately you're probably going to. I would imagine you end up with a mix of uses in there. The question is, how can the township kind of craft those, direct those, so that it achieves the township's objectives while allowing the developer to, do what they did there, get a return on their investment. That's the challenge.
Dan, I have, excuse me, a question, and first I want to thank you and all the volunteer members of EDAC for this exceptional presentation. I mean, I can't imagine how many hours went into this. The data alone, pulling all this data together is incredible. Looking at some of the demographics, the school population going down slightly while the age is increasing, right? The average age, meaning our seniors can afford to stay, so that's a good thing. But overall, a lot of this is great analysis. Any recommendations from EDAC specific to what we can do to see that the suburban, residential, family demographic that we have in place, that this is maintained as we move ahead to 2026?
I think the answer, and I'll speak for the committee, is balance I think it's an analytical approach. It's looking at the data and having that data inform our decision-making. It's talking to subject matter experts, people who've participated in these developments, whether elsewhere in the state or elsewhere in the region, that help put together these mixed-use properties. Look, not everything works. You know, I know one of the things that came up from these retail experts that were in that one day is we talked a lot about the shops up on Union Hill in Denville and what a great development that is. But they highlighted the very unique mix of circumstances that allowed that development to succeed. And for that one, they pointed out 5 or 6 similar developments that have failed miserably in this part of the world. I mean, it comes down to, are you close enough to an anchor store like a Best Buy or a Costco? You know, are you far away from malls like Rockaway and Livingston? All these things come into play, and they have an enormous amount of data and information that they use to inform their location decisions. You know, Whippany Village, we heard some pretty depressing, for lack of a better word, news about Whippany Village and its desirability as a retail site. They viewed that as a Class C site. People drive by at 50 miles an hour. You've got 2 buildings in front that block views of the back. It's just not a site that national retailers are going to be interested in, which came as a shock to me. I'd viewed that as a gold-plated site for the last 10 years.
Right.
You know, and this is the learning that continues for EDAC, and obviously we'll give the benefit of that learning to the Township Committee and the Planning Board as we get it.
Thank you.
I think, as a general comment, and having sat through many Fridays with EDAC, I'm most impressed with the fact that we have made concerted efforts in outreach to business people and prospects. One of the options that you point out to, obviously, is always to sit down with the property owners and developers, et cetera, and explore what they want to do in conjunction with what the zone will allow. I'm of the belief, although it may be controversial sometime, that market trends don't drive good zoning. Okay, in the 80s, it was, you're correct, office buildings, low impact, no demands on services, et cetera. It was the greatest thing in the world, so we all built them to the hilt. And now, with Parsippany sitting with 32% and us in around 28% vacancy, or Art maybe even better, here we are. And now we're looking at office buildings for an opportunity to convert them into other kinds of uses. Some are even coming down, which is the matter that's going on Route 10 right now. They're actually looking at large office buildings to remove them. So I think the communications or the connection that we provide in EDAC to communicating. George brings up Pine Plaza, and he knows how hard we've all been working on Pine Plaza, both through EDAC and personal meetings, et cetera. The Deputy Mayor and I can't tell you how many meetings we've had. I've explained it to EDAC. But the long and the short of it is that, unless you have a cooperative property owner developer to work along with you on what you want, and at the same time, a township that's willing to be receptive to what can go in there, then it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Do we have a Lowe's for a property like that, George? Sure. We get phone calls from Hawaii, from the real estate people who are ready to come over here in a minute to see it. But we're not going to bring somebody in to look at Pine Plaza if you don't have a receptive seller. What's the sense? So, and I enjoy it. I love it. We're all on Facebook. We see what everybody wants to do, bagel shop, and somebody wants donuts, who wants good ice cream. It's terrific. I wish we could drive that. And it's not necessary. It's not something that the township can control. So having said that, I think the meetings that we've held over time, John, who initiated this program back in the early days, brought it to the point where we were having meetings with developers here and property owners here, an exchange of information. We've tried to change the municipal culture, as we've said in the earlier days of this as well, make ourselves friendlier. Hanover Township, for the longest time in the county, maybe even still, has a reputation as being one of the most difficult towns in the world to get something done in.
Just you, Ron.
Both in time. Well, that's just a hearsay. That's just hearsay. But we've tried to deal with that by bringing together our department heads, by bringing together property owners, by bringing together members of the governing body in this room, and had very, very successful meetings and discussions, one of which I thought we'd only have 50 attendees, had over 100 or close to it. We have to continue that. I know that EDAC is moving and changing its stripes a little bit. We've done a yeoman job of bringing forth ratables from the time that John even began with the Litton property on to where we are now. Now we're into sustaining business, keeping what we have, making sure that retail people who operate in this environment of Hanover have the necessary amenities they need: signs, parking, lighting, safety, etc. That has to go good on. Do we want to maintain the residential integrity of this town? Sure we do. There's no question about it. It's more a bedroom community now than it ever was in the past. This was an industrial community. You know, it made paper, it made bricks, it made other types of manufacturing things. Do we want to retain the residential integrity? Yes. Is the trend away from single-family homes because of different attitudes and generations coming in? Yes, we understand that. Do we have to go with it? No, we do not. At some point, even the millennials that we talk about who want to live in rentals, etc., are going to want to raise families and buy homes. And that will be happening. So I think this particular product, and maybe John can certainly add to what I'm saying, this particular product that you have here, and this, by the way, George, this is the results of nearly 2 years of effort on the part of this group, should be shared with our planning board. We're in the process and planning now of re-examining the master plan for Hanover Township, and we are hungry for data that would affect the outcome of that master plan. This will just be a part of it. That's my opinion, folks. John?
No, I think page 16, Dan, sums it up pretty well as to the day in the life, as to what the members of the Township Committee face. These are harsh realities or strategies that we need to leverage to keep Hanover a safe, affordable, and a suburban community.
Right. And I think that needs to be made known to the residents as well, who a lot of times think that you can wave a wand and get Wawa in here instead of Quick Check.
wish it were
It
that
doesn't work
easy.
that way. However, that to segue to the next area is about data and data-driven decision making. You need to develop, and I think we're making progress towards developing a Moneyball culture here in town, in the township, right? Removing emotion from decision making and focusing more on real hard information and facts, and again to try to spread that to the residents and make them understand the thinking that's informing the township's decisions and the challenges and restrictions that limit them and impact them. Identifying data sources that can be leveraged by the township's governing body. One of the things that became clear as we went through this process between the state, the county, the federal government, the Census Bureau, external sources, there's an overwhelming volume of data. The challenge that creates is how do you analyze it? How do you interpret it? And that's also a challenge for the township and how you make that happen, facilitating the analysis of this data to aid in well-aligned decision-making. And there are a lot of questions that are going to impact the township in the coming years. We talked about some of them. How are continuing demographic changes going to impact the township? We don't have any control over that. Is the student population decline going to be ongoing, and what is that going to mean? What types of amenities do people expect, and will they want? How do we develop this town center? And how do we continually evaluate and reevaluate redevelopment alternatives for the township? Tom, Mike, anything you wanted to add here?
No, you got it.
Okay. All right, I'm going to stop doing that. Committee members, any questions here on data? We see this, again, it's coming whether we like it or not, the increasing usage of data in decision-making, and we see the township doing it. But that needs to be part of that so-called Moneyball culture. Yes, sir. Yep.
With the role of the increasing reliance on data, just across the general economy, was there any discussion amongst the committee about the appropriateness of whether or not there was some discussion with communications about the need for kind of focus, support, FTE type support for the communications function. Was there any discussion as part of the committee whether or not, with the increasing reliance on data, whether or not that role would need to be filled by a specifically dedicated or partially dedicated entity?
You know, I think that's an interesting question, and I think that we saw the urgent need as being in the communication space, because data, you know, different people handle different data different ways, different departments have different responsibilities. But I do think long-term, that may also be an evolutionary change, would be to create a position of that nature, bring in somebody, and assign them with that role. I don't think that, again, it was top of mind because the focus was more on communications, because the need is more immediate there, I think. But it's a great point, and something I think we should and would recommend the township should consider going forward. Yep.
And you might want to let everyone know that Megan Huncher at Morris County EDC is actually setting up data sources free of charge to municipalities. And they're real data sources. They're not generic. We can go in and do real good studies on our areas. We can get down to zip codes and census tracts and really find out information free of charge from the county. Some of those services might come.
The Morris County Economic Development Committee.
They can be expensive, but the county
Council.
is providing almost that FTE that you were talking about. Because all we got to do is ask her, and she will show up at our meeting. We ask her to run reports. She will run specific reports for us. So we do have a real benefit with the way Megan has somewhat matured that economic development.
No, my thought though was just more along the lines of once you've got the data sources, and as the mayor said, trends come and go, having someone, with the training of data analytics or being able to digest the data sources that we've got to provide the support that the governing body is going to need today and tomorrow going forward as we become more data dependent to help drive the economic growth philosophy for the township. To me, it's not just the collection of the data, which I'm glad to hear we do have those resources at the county level, but it's more the focus of it being someone's job to sit there and actually crunch what does this mean on a bigger, more macro scale, and how does it affect us? That was really more the question that I was thinking when I asked him.
That's a good question. Thank you. Okay. Yes, George.
Yeah, on enrollment, we see it as cyclical. Okay, at this point in time, we see it as a decline. Going into 2026 as the projection we are looking at, what do we see? Do we see that at another point in time it's going to start to go up again?
I don't know that we have that information. I happen to be on the Board of Ed. I happen to be on the Board of Ed, and I think the trend is supposed to kind of level out and maybe turn up this year, but I think to some extent that represents an influx from OLM. I do think there may be more kindergartners this year than there have been in a couple of years. Long term, I don't know that we've got any trending. I know that the statewide projections are for a continued downward trend in this regard. To the extent those impact us, I think it's there, but I don't know that we can say definitively how it would impact the township.
Dan, one question.
Yes, sir.
And it kind of goes to what George just asked you, and I also served on the Board of Ed.
Yep.
In Hanover Township, we have a lot of seniors, fortunately. And even my mom in East Hanover has a 4-bedroom house, and she lives there by herself. With the amount of houses that we have available, once our seniors move, young families are going to want to move into a 3- and 4-bedroom house. Have you guys looked at the impact that would have with the percentage of housing we have occupied currently by seniors and the children that may be coming to our house? Do we have a number that how many we have and what percentage that would tie into what we have?
I think that data is there. I know we've got it. I don't think we looked at that. We dug into that specifically, but it's certainly something we could do. Ace and report back. Blaze, I'm almost certain we have that level of demographic data and could look at it and try to derive some conclusions from that. But Ace, that's exactly the kind of analysis and thinking
the last
about.
report that I think was done on the elementary level, and I'm going back a few years, and I had a copy of it, indicated that student population, any increase in student population or any addition to student population was coming from resales. which makes an argument for the fact that, yeah, seniors who might be either leaving a single-family house and a younger family coming in who want a house for children are taking it. But that's where it's coming from, where the concern at that time was new starts and how many children would new starts bring in, what would their impact be on the infrastructure, the school systems, classroom sizes, et cetera, et cetera. So that question was somewhat answered, but not to the degree that Committeeman Gallagher is asking it.
Right.
That would require some sort of a census in order to ascertain how many people of what ages live in X houses, and in order to come up with that statistic.
And I think that data's out there. I don't think it's been analyzed, at least by EDAC. And
We do have that.
yeah,
By
we do.
age population, by various age groups, we do have a population.
Yeah.
And we have trends in what desirable housing types are. A four-bedroom home, they become functionally obsolete in years to come. Homes that families that are being formed now are smaller. The average age of a woman having their first child has gone up fairly dramatically over the last 10 years. And families are being formed later with less kids. That's the trend, and there's a whole host of financial underpinnings as to why that's happening. The millennial group, just so you know, is bigger than those boomers. So what's going to happen in the next 75 years is going to be dictated by that cohort, just like it was with old baby boomers.
Well, just in that also is, for instance, we have a lot of nieces and nephews in our lives, fortunately now, that are getting married. And now I find myself interviewing them. And two of them live in Jersey City in a beautiful building. And I said, you guys are getting married in September. Are you going to stay in Jersey City? They said, no, absolutely not. We want to get a single-family house and we want to have children. My only point about Hanover Township, and I always quote Tip O'Neill saying all politics is local and our job is to look at everything, especially here. And unfortunately, we can't just look at us now. It's like you said, it's county, it's state, it's nation. But my point is, I understand every time we come up to an election cycle, it's always referred to that 26% of our residents are seniors.
28.
That's a lot of housing. And my only concern is, and I know where we are with the enrollment, and right now it's comfortable, but I just would like to get a grip, and Dan, you said it's out there, if you guys can find that, it'd be great, just about how many we have and what the possibilities could be coming up, and at least for the next 3 to 5 years. Thanks.
Yeah. Dan, I think there's several macroeconomic, demographic factors that also need to be looked into here. Number one, declining rate of marriage. Number two, the sheer amount of debt millennials carry with them that will force the delay in childbearing years of those who are married. So I really think there's many factors Mr. Gallagher's talking about that we need to bring together to try to figure out how are they all going to impact, because it's just not business as usual has changed.
That's right, and I think that's one of the larger points that we're trying to make, is that we're going to have to be responsive and proactive in responding to these changes. Let me move on to just the last topic here, which is the last of the 4 subcommittees, which was around transportation. Obviously, not ideal in all respects. We'd love to have a light rail station. That's probably not going to happen. We've seen some really excellent road improvements. Pictured there is the improvements at Bear, and if you look at what that intersection was above and what it is below, that's a tremendous example of partnering with the developer to make some really significant and meaningful improvements. We've seen other ones at Jefferson Road, Route 10, over at Hanover, over on Hanover Avenue, and possibly some more to come here as we're going forward. So that's been one of the nice successes for the town. But we're the crossroads of the county. That's a blessing, but it's also a curse, because we get a tremendous amount of through traffic that causes backups every day at rush hour. As far as the conclusions, recommendations here, it's to let people know, like, look, again, it's not perfect. We know that. We've got some challenges, but, let the residents know what these numbers look like for, how many cars are getting through on Jefferson Road, what's the wait times, things like that. I know Jerry's got a lot of data on these kind of issues, and upcoming improvements. It's critical to continue to negotiate with developers who are undertaking redevelopment projects. I guess Barclays appears to be the next one up. to facilitate achievable transportation improvements, to the roads and access roads. Again, we're not going to get funding. I think the state said, John, there wasn't going to be funding for something like the next 25 years for improvements in this part of the world. From
We looked at light rail. EDAC wanted light rail. We thought that was something very viable where Hanover Township is.
Right.
Unfortunately, after going to the county, trying to get transportation funds to look at it, in the short term, next 25 years, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Secondly, public mass transportation route expansion, it's not going to happen either. Do we want it? Yes, we do. Did we explore how to get it done? Yes, as well. Shuttle services, we're trying to advance that. I know Maria has met with TransOptions, trying to advocate with TransOptions ways to form what we call a golden triangle. And the golden triangle would consist of Hanover Township, East Hanover, and Morris Plains, trying to shuttle people from these population centers, the workplaces, to the retail areas and support some sort of shuttle service. So that golden triangle idea is something in its infancy, and that we're trying to get some sponsorship behind it.
But to add on to John's remarks here, and most, forgive me if it sounds like redundancy, but we've gone over this so much. We've got a regional issue on our hands. We truly do. And I know our citizens complain, well, I can't get little Johnny to a soccer game, et cetera. It takes me 20 minutes to get crosstown, et cetera, et cetera. But, and I say the same thing. Take the car, park at crossings, look down Cedar Knolls Road at 3:30, 3:45, and tell me where the traffic's coming from. Because what's going on is to, and again, all the mayors have gotten together on this with the freeholders, that the areas of Madison, Florham Park, et cetera, Mayor Panulo's traffic, same as Mayor Taylor's traffic, same as Mayor Connolly's traffic, they don't have accesses to state highways. They don't get on 24. They don't get up to the highways that we have. So where do they go? Into our secondary, tertiary roads, up to our roads, and at peak hours, yeah, we take a load. Have we been able to deal with it in some of the critical points? Yes. I think some of the biggest relievers is obvious the one in front of Bayer Boulevard, and the Parsippany Road, Whippany Road. Sure, it backs up in that queuing lane onto Parsippany, but it empties out quickly. I think the great improvement out here on Jefferson Road and Route 10 is clear to everybody that it's working very, very smoothly, et cetera. And as well as still looking for opportunities to get from Bayer down to the Algonquin Parkway with a secondary road to relieve Route 10. That's critical. But we have some issues into that. There's a pros and cons to it. We have individuals that would rather leave it alone. We'd be crossing wetlands and some other state lands, et cetera. And there's some other individuals that say, hey, what are you going to do to relieve some of that traffic on 10? So this is the balance you talk about that we have to deal with every single day.
And really, from a township perspective, you have to focus on what's achievable. And there are limits to what's achievable. Of the four, subtopics, this is the area where we have, the most significant limitations, just as a matter of fiscal and operational reality.
Sure.
So to wrap up, we've tried to analyze these four critical drivers as comprehensively as possible and provide sound recommendations based thereon. Those include, one, we modernize and broaden township communication platforms, specifically social media, as soon as possible. Two, that we create a dedicated communications role within township government, and I actually very much like Ed's idea that maybe we think about some kind of analyst role here as well, but that's probably down the road. Three, to develop and negotiate strategic development, redevelopment solutions that avoid externally driven outcomes, such as COA or other court-ordered resolutions. Four, to aggressively leverage and analyze demographic and other relevant data to inform decisions and strategic planning, a change to what I'll call a Moneyball culture. And finally, to facilitate achievable, that being the key word here, transportation enhancements and management. EDAC will continue to change its focus. In the coming months, I think we want to do is leverage external experts. We want to focus on some of the many unanswered questions we've raised tonight, answer the questions that you've raised tonight here going forward, and continue to really refine and implement this plan. I think we view it as something of a living document that will evolve over the next few years. The bottom line is this, and I think I can safely speak for the group in saying this. What we're recommending is a strategic approach. We want to focus on balancing redevelopment and maintaining our suburban character. We need to be mindful of market and demographic forces, and we need to be focused on an analytical approach to achievable outcomes that will leave this township well-positioned for 2026 and hopefully long beyond. So thank you to the committee for your time this evening. Thank you for all in attendance for lending an ear. And with that, I'll throw the floor open to any questions.
Thank you, Dan.
If there's any member... If there's any member of the public that has a question that they would like to raise EDAC from the presentation, which they've given tonight, now would be an appropriate time. There will be a copy of this presentation on the Hanover Township website if you'd like to reference it. It's an excellent body of work. It's fact-based. It's advisory. It's not policy. And it's something that the Township Committee, again, needs to evolve and look at, and the Planning Board needs to assess it. But we thank you for providing us this advisory information.
I should raise this too. All the appendixes that have the detail that built a lot of this are also there. Appendixes from each, which are the reports of each of the individual subcommittees that were developed over the course of the last year or so. Yep, questions? Yes, sir.
When you talk about the donut in the center of the town, and I look at the planning maps, just how expansive is that? Can you describe all the possible properties? I mean, we had a discussion about this the other night. You've got a pretty good sense of that.
It's 1,400 acres or something.
Those sites
140, sorry.
that were primed for redevelopment. We identified about 140 acres. That does not include everything from Algonquin Parkway down Route 10 and through Hugh Lane, the Donegal, out to South Jefferson. Doesn't include everything. The ones that we felt would be prime redevelopment targets total about 140 acres. It would be more than that if you added that whole corridor.
Is there a vision for that? Do we have a vision that we can go out and sell to attract developers? Like otherwise, I think you run the risk of just developing individual tracts without a strategic picture in mind.
I think that's the point. I think that's the challenge that I think is before the township.
I think that question will be soon answered. The Planning Board has been working on this. EDAC's been working on its activity from a marketing standpoint. The Planning Board has been working on reinventing Route 10 for 2 years, and we're getting very close to the point, Jim, of finalizing what that'll be. And we really look forward to doing that and then turning EDAC loose with that information so it can begin to market Route 10 successfully for us. I think we have a question up front.
Mayor Sheridan.
Mayor, members of the Township Committee, I want to thank you people, volunteers. I know this has been a long, frustrating road in many aspects, but overall, you're speaking of quality of life in the township. I just want to say, because the ladies have done a terrific job, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
The only thing I wanted to ask, if we could add, is maybe an environmental aspect to this. And one of my bugaboos is to get all the landscapers registered, and also to put some type of regulation that muzzle the noise on these blowers. So if you just consider that, I'm eternally grateful.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Put that on the list. Thank you, John. And John, as John mentioned earlier, we remember that you're kind of the founding father of all this. So thank you for your service and vision. Yes, sir.
I'd like to start a question. You mentioned there's 140 acres in this core that we're talking about for township as a town center. Give us an idea of some of the properties.
Well, the vast majority of it is 80 acres that's on either lane. There are, Whippany Village is certainly one. There are several properties next to the Whippany Valley where we have some boarded up homes that we kind of target almost for a park. I thought that might be a good idea if just considering that. As you get down past around by Molly Malone, when you take a look at the land from Troy Road to Algonquin, there are several key pieces that really only amounts to about 4 or 5 of them
One of them just was recently approved for a hotel. But you have a couple of big chunks of property that are ripe for redevelopment, and I have contact with those property owners, and some of them are interested in doing something. They're just not quite sure. They're waiting for a little bit of direction. And I think once that happens, we might be able to unlock some of those pieces there. So that old industrial area from Algonquin Parkway to Troy Road will change. And hopefully, with some of the data that we're getting, we'll be able to rethink, create something really very unique. Not like East Hanover, not like Parsippany. We think we might be able to create something very, very unique. And hopefully, when we get some direction, we'll find out what that might be.
The other point I'd like to make is that I think the Economic Development Committee has done a wonderful job with this. Certainly gives the planning board something to look at. You mentioned Whitney Village as not being a Class A retail environment. We've never anticipated it to be a retail Class A environment. We've always anticipated it to be small local retailers that would allow for township gathering. Our problem is getting the developer to understand what he has and get him moving, and getting that developed the way it was originally intended. We thought of that as basically a park area with restaurants, small local retailers that would be great for the local Hanover Township residents to be able to take advantage of. What's going on in Hanover Avenue, I think, speaks to the leadership we have of the Township Committee from John. A lot has been developed here. All of a sudden, we become the market capital of the world. That's good. We've asked the questions on most of them, especially this German outfit that has come in. We asked if they realized the market that they were moving into. Their comment was they were 100% sure they could coexist. We weren't so sure, but they're very confident. And we, as a group on the planning board, are happy to see that they're doing that kind of marketing. We would have expected nothing less. I think we have a real problem with Route 10 and how the ordinances get written in order for us to be able to take advantage of the restrictions that exist on those properties. They're fairly narrow in many areas. It would be ideal to be able to include the shopping center at Pine Plaza into that. It would be ideal to have been able to include corporate communications as a part of that. It would be ideal to include River Walk as a part of that. There are certain limitations with all of it. And a lot of it's going to come about with the ordinances that get developed and with our willingness, both as the Township Committee and as the Planning Board, to accept a little bit less than we may have wanted in order to get people to combine properties. Because if we can't get a combination of properties, we're not going to get Route 10 developed the way this township wants it. And that's been a problem for us. COLA is a big issue for us in the residential area. You guys have hit that nail right on the head. We have somebody in the township, I think, that has much more knowledge of COLA and what's going on than most of us on the boards. He's been giving us leadership and direction. But with Governor Christie and what's happened with COLA over the past few years, we're all concerned about that. My biggest concern is that we've developed a lot of multifamily types of properties in this town. But if you turn around and look at it, a homeowner can't sell their property and buy one of these others without putting a couple $100,000 more into the process. How do we get our single-family home prices up to the point where somebody can transfer out of a single-family home and into a townhouse? Right? They're going to be $150,000 to $250,000 short in that kind of a sale. So we have to do something that creates benefit to the single-family homeowner. You guys have hit the nail right on the head with that. The only homes that have been developed around here and sold are the ones that are $900,000 and over $1 million. They come in, they get developed, and they go in a hurry, but they're single single lots here and there. There's no big developments of single-family homes anymore. So I think you've done a wonderful job. I think you've hit the nail on the head. We've got a tremendous amount of problems to deal with. And you've given us an awful lot of thought as to how to start approaching some of these.
Great. Thank you.
I hope that between Economic Development, the Planning Board, the Board of Adjustment, and the Township Committee, we can put together a strategy that lets Hanover Township continue to be the right place for people to live.
Well said, Gene, well said. You know, John brought up, there's another point, I don't want to belabor it, but John brought up environmental issues, but he brought up environmental issues on a little lesser level, you know, on what time to cut my lawn. But when you talk about Hanover Township and go back and the environmental issues in this township, this is a mill town, guys. This was manufacturing. We had a lot of nasty stuff go into the ground. There's no question about it, and I use the phrase, we're paying for the sins of our fathers. But one thing I am proud of in Hanover Township is that over the years, we've negotiated with different property owners, developers, et cetera, and in that negotiation process, it was taking into consideration the cost and the amount of cleanups on some of these properties. Removal of trichloroethylenes in certain areas that are now beautiful housing projects, I might add. Removal of PCBs in areas that are now viable, not at our cost. So that's has an economic impact on us and the taxes too. So we all on Township Committee and the governing body can't ignore that in some of these potential possible negotiations, concessions, whatever you want to call it, we have to look at all of the things that affect that piece of property, not the least of which, I don't know that there's a piece of property in Hanover that doesn't have an environmental impact, including the new Route 24 we have from the state that's slowing up my deed transfer because they've got some asphalt debris on the site that they have to clean up. So, I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah,
But having said that, you know.
With regard to my class and recognizing that it's not always apparent, are we able to identify the reason for its transmission?
Can you repeat the
Can
question?
we repeat Rich's question?
The
'Cause actually we can't
the
hear him.
question is, can we identify the reason for the owner of Pine Plaza's quote-unquote intransigence? I mean, we've met with part of their ownership group.
Several times.
They seem not to really have a sense of what to do.
There are two main equity owners of that property, and those equity owners are not on the same page. And the equity owners, this EDAC board, members of the Township Committee, have met several times encouraging those property owners with many, many ideas on how to redevelop Pine Plaza, which is a jewel of a site, which is 18 acres, which could be a tremendous location for some, I can't mention the brand names now, that we brought to them, but could be a great opportunity for some of those brand names. But the first and foremost issue is, how do you get two partners onto the same page at the same time? That's what we're battling right now.
Well, I ask that only because sometimes, and I don't know if this is the case, if there are multiple commercial property owners, they use some property for purposely as a tax loss to offset the profits they earn from other properties that are doing well. I don't know if that's the reason
No.
here, but that's why I asked. And it's not always, and they don't always make it apparent that that's the reason why they're being difficult. So that's why I just wanted to know whether something was apparent yet as to why they are so difficult. But maybe their stack is the reason why that you identify.
Well, I think we have a problem with Cedar Knolls Mall.
Can I address the environmental question for a
And I
second?
think it's the same reason. They own a number of properties all over. And I think they're using Cedar Knolls Mall as a tax loss. They don't seem eager to do anything with it.
Yeah, the issue with Cedar Knolls Mall, it's a very unfortunate situation where you had an owner who passed, and that mall went into an estate. And subsequently, as that estate process was going through, we were meeting with that group trying to encourage redevelopment there. And there was some really great ideas and exchanges that the mayor and I sat through, advancing that. And then it all stopped because, unfortunately, there was a tragic death within that family of the new owner of the facility. So are we done yet in terms of trying to deal with Cedar Knolls Mall? Absolutely not. It is a goal. We believe it is a primary viable commercial site, and we're going to push that to its fruition. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd just like to address John for a second regarding the environmental impact of, especially the noise and the exhaust. Just today, I was on the phone with the state because in the tree industry, you're now going to have a certified tree expert or a certified tree operator on your job. You're going to have to license in a different way than ever before. And I even asked them, because I'm writing recommendation letters for guys that are grandfathering themselves in, I said, how are you going to enforce it? Well, the enforcement is going to be tied to your insurance. And getting insurance in the tree business is very difficult. And once a company drops you, it's very hard to get a new policy. So with this new licensing, I also talked to them about working in specific towns and the business administrator. So I can't speak for the landscaping, but I know, I can't tell you how many calls I got. I know you've gotten them about somebody that has a chipper going at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning. That's going to discontinue because now there's going to be consequences because they're going to be licensed and there's going to have to be a licensed individual on every job at every time. So there's going to be a paper trail. And again, the consequence is going to be the insurance. And the registration is incredible. Like, I talked to them today, like I said, I'm writing recommendations. Like, you're not going to just be able to go get equipment anymore and say that you're in business. So that's going to improve, and I'm going to speak to them again and share everything with Joe. And I don't know, again, John, about landscapers, but I know we have a very strict ordinance in our town, and if you do call the police, they will respond, but it's a shame that the contractors don't realize that and respect it. But in the tree industry, which is the highest decibel equipment, that's going to change, and it's going to change as of June 18th this year. It's coming right up.
I think
I don't want to overstep, but we want to first comment. You're very informative with that, I appreciate it. The thing with the registration within the town of the landscape, the town always had a noise decibel ordinance going back to the 60s. And that ordinance can be used at the time that these landscapers are permitted usage in the town to make sure that their equipment is up to standard. So the mechanism is in the township already in terms of the noise ordinance. What's needed is just that one extra step of the registration and inspection process that the engineering office, public works department, however the mayor cares to facilitate that issue, would certainly go a long way in improving how the application of this equipment is used.
I found it interesting when I talked to the Board of Health. I don't want to get locked up
No,
on
I
the
think I
subject.
gotta actually
I don't want to
wrap
get locked up on cutting my lawn. But at the
This
same
is
time,
well beyond the purview of
at the same
EDAC.
time, interestingly enough, landscapers can start earlier with machines than we residents. And I find that a little, strange. Yeah, they might be able to start at 8 o'clock, but we can't start till 9.
Should talk to the mayor about that, Ron.
But whatever. Hey, Dan,
thanks
thank
again.
you. Great job.
Great job.
Appreciate it.
Continue this meeting, or do I think we have to because...
Yeah, all right, okay. The administrator reminds me that we're going to continue with the general meeting. We are in session, but you know what? I'm going to give about a few-minute adjournment to let any individuals that'd like to leave or be on their way, fine, thank you. And then we'll continue with the business of Hanover.
We'll go into
Because everything is or they might go to California State House, which is very strict.
Did we get papers in? Is this? Put your papers in?